to another episode of Resilience Behind the Walls. My name is J.O. Richardson, and I have the honor of introducing a very special guest for this episode. The person that's joining me on this episode, I look at her as my second mother. You know, she's done so much stuff, not only for me, but other people in the community. And I honestly just want to give her flowers while she's here and really celebrate everything that she's done for so many people. She's been doing social justice work for over 3 decades. She's done so much across the country to help other people struggling with social justice issues. And I just wanted people to know as of now the history of this, basically a staple in our community. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce Sister Emma Jones to the podcast. Welcome, Sister.
Thank you. I don't know if I deserve those wonderful accolades. What I can say to you is that as I sit here today, I think I would be remiss if I didn't say, first of all, that today marked the 24th anniversary of the brutal Ku Klux Klan style lynching murder of my son Malik Jones on April 14, 1997, as Malik sat in a car, boxed in and unarmed. And what I understand is that the officer, when the car stopped, the officer ran up to the side of the car, took his revolver out of his holster and started to beat on the window until the window eventually shattered. And with that, he did this with the butt of his gun, turned the gun around in his hand, and then he leaned over into the car, took the keys out, and continued to shoot my son. And he said in his own report that he shot Malik so many times that he didn't remember how many times that he shot, but he does remember that he shot him until he noticed that he was slumped to the right. And after he was slumped to the right, Malik is lying there basically bleeding to death, and they dragged him out of the car, put handcuffs on him as he's dying, bleeding to death. And then when New Haven police got word that this shooting had taken place, I believe, and I don't know if it's appropriate to mention his name, but an officer whose name I would never forget because he saved me from having to defend some other things involving Malik. So this officer showed up and he said that when he showed up, the East Haven police officers were at the trunk of their car, and they were in the process of rambling through the car to find a gun so that they could plant a gun in the car. And had it not been for them showing up at the time that they did, they would have planted a gun in the car, and then I would have had to defend that against Malik having a gun in the car that he had been driving. And the other thing is that when the medical examiner showed up at the scene, they attempted to put Malik in the emergency van so that they could administer some kind of medical support for him. But the officers, we saw like a taping on Channel 8 where the officers were tugging back and forth with Malik, dragging him between the van and the medical car. And for me, it's just demonstrated to me from the very beginning that he had no consideration for Malik as a human being. And in fact, he made it very clear that when he was shooting Malik, he said the reason that he kept shooting was at first when he shot Malik in his upper left chest area, that Malik gave him a defined go to hell look. And with that, he kept shooting. So I think that speaks volume to how police officers and maybe how the Europeans in this country actually feel about people of color in this country. And I think that we make a grave mistake when we forget what our history and our culture is. When we forget the environment that we have to survive in. When we forget that these are the heirs of the very people who stole us from our native land and who spreaded us all over this country and treated us less than animals. And so on and continued to do so even after slavery was over, that all of us know that then there was the Jim Crow, and then there was the Civil Rights Movement, and then there was 100 years of lynching, and then came the integration, and integration for many of us was worse or just as bad as any of those other things that I've called out to you, because it gave us a false view that we had somehow overcome some of the atrocities that I mentioned. But no, we had not overcome at all. We had been placed in another position where it made it easier for a lot of these really horrific things to happen to us, because it gave the impression that things were better and that there had been a major change in this country and that we can all live together as one. And I think that that was a very deceptive kind of connotation to put on a period at the end of what I just said. So on the backdrop of that, now we have situations where we are so trusting of the very people who did all of these horrific things to us. We seem to trust them more than we trust ourselves. And I hope we get the opportunity to delve into that conversation, because I like to talk about how we can become more empowered, and how we can move away from the oppression and the suppression and move to a place of self-sufficiency, move to a place of, I'm competent and feel very confident in that. And I'm, capable of thinking and I can take care of myself. And I know, as a matter of fact, that we are among, or if we are not, the most humane group of people on the face of the earth. And I don't think that some of us have come to that realization that that's a reality. And if you don't believe it's a reality, then, just follow me down memory lane as I talk to you about some of the things that has happened to us that would demonstrate to you very clearly how humane and how forgiving we are, despite the fact that we have been treated worse than any other race that has ever been here in America. And so I just wanted to say that to begin the conversation so that we can put it in a proper context.
I appreciate you so much for doing that. And as you were speaking, I couldn't help but just to think of the origin of police, the black codes, why the police were even established. They were established to get runaway slaves, to bring runaway slaves, to put cases on, to trump cases on runaway slaves when they were free. Not even runaway slaves, freed slaves. They wanted to imprison freed slaves and make free slaves go back to the plantation. And one of the ways of doing that was to pump charges on them, put a disorderly conduct. That was the most notable charge they were putting on people, the easiest charge. And they would put that on these free slaves. And by them being charged with disorderly conduct, that constitute bringing them back to the slave plantation. And as I think of police, just how police has evolved, I think that they've always viewed the black community as we're free slaves, and they're going to do everything in their power to enslave us again, or to at least put us in that capacity. And I feel like the Department of Corrections is that capacity. Just having us under probation, TS, house arrest, living in halfway houses, whatever, some type of supervision is that. So I couldn't help but to also think when you were talking about all of the years that have passed since they murdered Malik. They murdered Malik 25 years ago, and since then, I see a lot of people standing up, and it's a lot of people dying because as of recent now, we have all of this technology, so we're able to record a lot of these incidents. But and there's a lot of uprising happening. A lot of people are doing rallies and doing all of this stuff. And I remember as a young teenager growing up, you were the first real example of somebody physically I knew that was doing that. But way before it became a fad for that to happen across the nation, we were blessed. I was blessed enough to see you doing that, walking in East Haven. While the people was spitting and throwing stuff at y'all, we physically got to see you walk into East Haven with hundreds of people walk into East Haven and demand justice. And I feel somewhat guilty when we go crazy for, and I'm not saying, I don't want this to be taken out of context, but when we stand up and we say we want justice for George Floyd, we want justice for all these people, and I see a lot of people doing that as of recently, and I ask myself, especially locally here in Connecticut and in New Haven, I'm like, do people even understand the history that exists with these police in New Haven. And I know for me, it started with they murdered Malik, you know, and I'm like, a lot of people, they standing up and he's talking about nationally what's happening, all of these people that the police have murdered, but I'm like, they don't even know the horrific story of what happened to Malik right here in their own backyard. You know, and that's one of the reasons why, especially like a lot of newer, younger people, they weren't even born when this happened. But this is a reality of what happened in our state, our town, New Haven County. This is what happened, you know. And I was talking with a brother yesterday, and a brother told me, he said, I was talking to him about, you know, just today, you know, today being an anniversary, and the brother told me, he said, you know, East Haven cops did that. So, you know, the East Haven cops are crazy, but these cops in New Haven, they're good cops, you know. They chased this kid through some backyards, and they all had guns on them, and the kids didn't get killed. You know, these are some good cops. And I got offended when he said that. I got offended because I said, that happened. But no cop ever stood up and said, when all these incidents happen that we see and we know, never seen no cop stand up and say, that's wrong what that cop did. I'm not standing for it, I'm not representing that, and I'm gonna stand with the people because that's wrong and that don't represent who I am. I only know one cop that did that. I'm not gonna say his name out of respect for his position. But it was only one cop that did that. No cop I've seen, I haven't seen that done publicly. And even with this situation, I haven't seen it done publicly where people are denouncing what happened and holding people accountable for real. You know, and that's just a norm when it comes to these cases. So I don't want to babble too much, but I just wanted to highlight that there's a lot of people running around commemorating Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Eric Garner, Sean Bell, and may all of these people rest in peace for for what they experienced and what they went through for them being murdered. But I just want people to know, right here, 25 years ago today, this brother was murdered by police. A lot of this was before internet and people could record it and all this stuff. We wanted to let people know, like, this is the history of our town, our community. This is what happened in our community. And I'd like to ask you, sister, how has your life changed since that incident?
How has my life changed? Well, first of all, to answer that question, I have to go back to the day of the incident. I remember I was working at a law firm. I'm a lawyer. I need to go back to the day of when the incident happened. I remember I was driving, I was headed home, and I'm Muslim, and so I tried to keep my spirit clean, and I remember very clearly that when I arrived at exit 2, that I started praying, and then I learned later that at that very same time that happened, that my son Malik on the other side of the highway was getting off of the highway at exit 2 on the other side of the highway. And by the time I reached home, I walked into my bedroom and I dropped my briefcase on the floor and the phone, because the phone was ringing. And so I rushed off and picked up the phone and started to, we didn't have cell phones by the way, so readily then. So I don't even know if I even had a cell phone, but I do remember that I was in my bedroom and the phone was ringing, and the person on the other end of the phone said he was crying, and he says, Miss Jones, this is Biggie. And I know who Biggie, I knew who he was. And so he said, Miss Jones, something bad happened. And something bad happened, and he was in tears, and I could barely understand what he was saying. But he said some cop shot Malik on Grand Avenue, and he said, I can't believe it. He says, and then shortly thereafter, Breland walked into my driveway, and the next thing I knew, he was upstairs knocking on the door. Says, come on, go with me. And he just held my hand and says, come on, hurry. We got to hurry. And I knew it was bad. As a matter of fact, as I tell you this, I could feel my stomach literally like turning over. I could feel my guts like moving around in my stomach. And so it was a very traumatic experience. It's a traumatic experience that I know now that I would never ever get over, but I've adjusted myself to deal with the misery, the pain, and the sorrow. Now, how do you adjust yourself to live with trauma, pain, and sorrow that is unspeakable? Trauma, pain, and sorrow that seem to rip your heart out of your chest, and you have to live with it. And that's what it is. But what is even worse for me is that my children, who were very young at that point and who were also traumatized and who's also still traumatized today, and they still, in the morning we figure out what it is we're going to do. And we start calling each other to see how we are. And that's not the easiest life in the world to live. And it's not that we just do this on the 14th, because on the 14th, my oldest son got married on the 14th. And my second oldest son, who's gonna freak out when he knows that I said this, because he's so traumatized by it. He does not want anyone to know. But this is the first time I'm saying this. It was on the birthday of my second son. So just think of his pain and his trauma and his sorrow. So, and my daughter had made Malik special something for him, and he was on his way back home to get it, and it stayed in the house for I don't know how long, I can't even tell you. And as we knew that Malik, he held certain things very special, like the certain kind of brush to take a bath with, and if you want a shot of it, guess what? It's hanging still in the bathroom. Yeah, it's there. The last shoes, the last clothes that he wore, they're still in a very safe place in my house. And so that's how we deal with it. And Malik has a little girl. She was about to turn 4. And she was with a babysitter at the time that the incident happened. And the babysitter didn't realize it. She was running around the house screaming, Malik, Malik, because the babysitter knew that it was Malik. And you can see it on television. And so my granddaughter is looking at this, and she's traumatized. She was traumatized by it. And she slept on my stomach, literally, every single night until she was about 6 years old. 6 or 7, yes. And I just held her, I just held on to her. And, caressed her to try to confirm for her that everything would be all right. Knowing that everything would never be all right. Never, ever be all right. It wasn't all right then. It hasn't been all right during the journey that we've gone through, and it's not all right today. I think the journey that we've gone through, though, however, has, brought not relief, but it's put us in a place where we can look at the situation for what it is and put everything that happens, not only to us, what happened to us, but to put everything else in a proper context for the rest of our brothers and sisters out there. And sometimes I feel more pain for my brothers and sisters who are still here than I feel for what happened to us. And the reason for that, it's so deep to say something like that, like it doesn't make any sense, but it makes sense to me because, I have to try to weigh where we are. And when you look back on historically where we've been, the brother here, Brother Jill, mentioned that the history of how police officers came about and how they were treated. So I won't go back to the history of that. But I will say that it was, I believe, in the 50s when the first police officer was a black police officer was appointed to serve as a police officer. In the 50s, that's like yesterday in terms of how long we've been here. So just think about that. And just let your brains mesmerize that we only have a black officer in that shortest period of time. Like, what's up with that? And then they were sworn in at that time as a nigger officer. And not only were they sworn in as a nigger officer, but they were sworn in to, their job was to catch, if they were out paroling the community, they were only authorized to hold the person, but they did not have authority to make an arrest. So they could hold the person until a legitimate police officer, a white guy, came and made an official arrest. So think about that. But here's the thing for me that hurts deeply, is the fact that we know all of these things, but yet we act as if it never even happened. And some of us would even get angry. You talk about correcting people for the wrong that they do, correcting officers for not speaking up, or correcting officers. We have not even reached the stage in our development of humane relationship with the rest of the world, to the extent that we would challenge them on the wrong that they do, not to even mention holding them accountable. And by the way, let me go off to the side just for a moment to say that I believe it was in 2006 when it was Amnesty International, which is the organization which is supposed to be the humane organization that really look at what's going on in the country. And in 2006, I believe, I haven't looked at my notes that recently, but they released a report saying that the abuse of police officers, and speaking in terms of black people, is one of the most egregious, brutal, and inhumane and traumatizing thing that is happening to people, and this is about us, in America today. And yet, she said, the report said, there is no accountability. That was the conclusion of the study. And just think about that for a moment. That organization is the organization that is supposed to look at, conducting studies across the world and looking at who's, violating, human rights. And here we are in our own country, and our human rights are being violated every day. And there's absolutely no accountability. And even today, we are reluctant to, brother just said it very clearly here, we are reluctant to hold them accountable today. But it's not just being reluctant to hold police accountable. We're reluctant to hold anyone that is European accountable for what they do. And as a matter of fact, we are more likely to defend them. And you get into heavy discussion, not even discussion, but arguments and fights around, well, this is a really good person and they did some really good things. And that's, and you have to think about, well, is this the nature of us that is so humane that we would do this, or is it about something else? And that something else is this thing that we need to take a very good look at, because it takes me off to another place. Like let's just take a look at, for example, I think of black people as the only race of people in the world that I know where you can come into our community, anybody can come into our community and basically do whatsoever they please and get away with it, and there's no accountability. What's up with that? What is the problem with that? Who's responsible for that? Is it us? Is it the way that we've been trained, orientated? Is it something uniquely different about the way that we think? Here's a good example. I can tell you that for me, brother said that I was involved in civil rights since I was a child, and that is the truth. In the backwoods of Alabama, Barefoot County, I was there. I was there when Dr. Martin Luther King came down. I was there when Stokely Carmichael and James Austin and people like that came down. And I was a young girl. I hadn't even reached out of my teens yet. And there I was. And they were using me as the young person who would deliver the demands up to the elected official when we arrived at the city limit, and we had a prohibition to keep us from marching beyond the city limit, that we would, me and this other young man, whom I don't even remember his name, I long to know where he is or what he's doing, and is he all right, because he was scared and I was not scared, and he would hold my hand so tight I thought that his nails would pierce a hole in my hand, because he would hold my hand so tight. But we would go up to the elected official, and you remember people like Lummy Jenkins, and people that they had deputized to be officers and that kind of thing. And we would go up, we would deliver the demand, and then get on our knees and pray. And I was that girl that you saw in someone's arm that was picked up when we went over the Pettus Bridge. Just as we went over there, I got ran over by a horse, and I could feel this knee up in my forehead, and we got tear gas, and I was lifted up and taken into church, and someone washed my eyes, the tear gas out of my eyes. Well, I only detracted to tell that story to say that, yes, we are people, that we are survivors, and I want my people to know that. I want them to know that we can do some incredible things. All we have to do is just step out there and do it. I was a little kid. I had to get permission from my father, and my father explained to my siblings. I wasn't the oldest, I wasn't the youngest, but I wanted to do this, and he was going to allow me to do it, and with the understanding that I could be dead, that I might not come home because I may get killed, that I may go to jail, and I did go to jail, and that I would, they locked us up in a big room because they didn't have enough room to put all of the arrestees in. And so we got hung up in the city hall, wherever it was. And so, but all of these things that we are capable of doing, back to my point, to connect that dot about our thinking. Why is it that we are the only community where people can come from anywhere in the world, or any other neighborhood, or any other municipality or city, and come into our community and do whatsoever they please? And we find it acceptable. We allow it to happen. But going to their neighborhood, you better make sure you don't even drive through when it gets dark, because otherwise you may not live to get out of there, or you may end up in a prison, if not at a graveyard someplace. And I'm not I'm not overly stretching the point I'm making. And I'm making the point that um, it's time right now. It's not tomorrow. Right now. Right this very moment. It is time. I knew that when I was a little girl. So I think it's time for all of us to know that the liberation and the freedom of black people in America is totally and completely the responsibility of black people. And that nobody else is capable of liberating us. That we have to do that. That we have to start carrying each other on each other's shoulders. And so the people talk about Lord Floyd and the rest of the people, Lord Floyd, there wouldn't have been any big demonstration had that young black girl, that young sister, whomever she is, if she didn't have a cell phone, and if she didn't have that evidence that she exposed, and thank God, if she exposed it to other people before it got in the hand of the elected official and the people that are supposed to provide justice and equality and that kind of thing for us, that's supposed to protect our best interests, had it gotten in those hands, it would have been a whole nother story. And the story would have been that family and other people would have been defending Lord Floyd's reputation. And they would have been defending maybe that he had a gun, yeah, he was this, he was all of these other things. And I can't tell you how many people that I have worked with, how many families, all across this country, where the family had to defend something that the person never did. And here recently, before I left Savannah a couple of months ago, there's a young man that's driving down Waters Avenue, and there's a report that apparently an officer said that he had pointed a gun. He told him to get out of the car. He stopped him. It was supposedly a traffic stop. And the officer stopped the guy, and he was supposed to have told him to get out of the car with his hands up. The brother did that. He got out of the car with his hands in the air, laid on the car. He assumed the position. And you know what I mean when I say assume the position. I'm not a guy, and I know what it is. And all of my brothers, I have a brother who lived in Bridgeport, said every time a cop stopped me, I get out, and before they say anything to me, I assume the position. And I said, what does that mean? He said, I put my hand on the trunk of the car. I thought, put this on the trunk of the car, and I open my legs wide, and I just lay on the trunk of the car with my hand up in the air, my legs wide open, so that they can do what they do.
There's so much stuff that you just said right now, and I'm just thinking to myself, how trained we are to respond to mistreatment. I remember growing up, I'm from the Hill section, well, you know that, but I'm in New Haven in the Hill section. I remember growing up and just being used to the cops taking you on the side of the house and pulling down your pants and flashing a flashlight in your privates and like checking you to see it. Like that's normal. And I'm thinking, and it go back to like something you said, why do they come in our communities and just treat us the way they treat us? And I feel like a large part of the work that I do right now is to push self-sufficiency in our community. And the reason why I do that is because when I look around in my community, we don't own nothing in our community. We don't own the houses we live in. We don't own the businesses in our community. We don't own nothing. It's all people that are not from our community coming in our community, telling us where we can live at, how much our rent is gonna be, what we gonna buy from the corner stores. And I feel like and I look at other communities across the state where people are homeowners, they have their local stores and restaurants selling their local ethnic produce and ethnic things that represent their culture. And I just think of Dixwell Avenue, Congress Avenue, Grand Avenue. We could put in all these avenues, and we don't have nothing like that in our neighborhoods. And I feel like that contributes to cops coming in our neighborhood, treating us the way they want to treat us, and just all of these entities coming in even the school systems, the way they teaching our kids. You know, it's like all of these people are coming into our communities because they know we don't own our communities, and that they have a red carpet to just come in our communities and treat us the way they want to treat us. And I feel like that's what contributes to all of the stuff that happens. That for a large part contributes to how we're viewed in our community and how we're treated in our community. Because they don't own. I just think that I always use this example when I talk to brothers and sisters. I'm like, I've seen and I've been a part of cops just pulling up. We're standing in front of somebody's house. My friend lives at this house. We're on it. Get inside. Don't stand out here. And I'm saying to myself, like, what? We just sitting out here talking. We can't sit on the porch and talk on a nice day. And then I realized that the reason the cop would not do this if we were in deep Hamden, deep somewhere else where a lot of people are homeowners, and when they pull up and they see people hanging outside in front of their house, it's normal. They own the house. They're going to keep it going. They know we don't own the house. So they know the homeowner that doesn't live in the area would in line with them of them patrolling us. You go in the house. Even though you live here, you can't sit on your porch because I know you don't own this house. I know you don't own it, and if you get too crazy, we're going to tell the landlord and make it inconvenient for you to stay in this property. The same thing with everything in our communities. They know we don't own nothing, and they know that at any given time, they can make it difficult for us to even walk around in our own communities. Our own communities that we are forced to live in. That they're forcing us to live in these communities. They got better properties and better things going on, but they forcing us to live in wherever they want us to live in. And they control us and they treat us however they want to treat us because they know we don't own nothing and they know we're not self-sufficient. We depend on them for a lot of stuff. They know.
Let me say this. The way you describe it is like there's a public policy of police containment, and that's a mouthful, but that's what it is, a public policy of police containment. And what I mean by that is when there's a public policy of police containment, it's not just the police, it's the entire system that join together to keep you in your place. Try to go into the bank and get a mortgage. I remember when I was the director of People Acting for Change over in the Hill, we went over there and we took nothing except the people themselves and completely revitalized Ann Street. And I'd like for you to go over there and take a look at Ann Street. And we did it depending on each other. I had gone to Berkeley at the law school to learn revitalization, community-based economic development. Came back to New Haven establish a federal community development credit union down at 770 Chapel Street, New Haven. It was a credit union there. But then, for everything we establish, we think that we can't hold it down unless we bring the other side of the world into it. And that's when we start to fail. Every institution that I know of, the moment we establish these institutions, then other people come in and we allow them to take it over. It's that whole part of that whole public policy of containing us and keeping us in the predicament that we are in. So we have to understand where it's coming from. You think that it's coming from a good place, and it sounds like it's coming from a good place, but the effect of it is that it's placing us in a worse predicament than we were. You think you're here to help us, but as I started out saying, there's no other race that is capable of liberating us or granting us freedom. That's something that we have to take. We have to take it on our own to liberate ourselves, to stand united with each other around everything that we do that has to do with has anything to do with our livelihood. And the other thing, speaking about public policy of police containment, you think that when an officer is involved in a particular incident, if you shot somebody, you think if you go to the hospital, that the hospital, all right, and then you think that if you go to, no matter which institutions you name, that there's a part of that public policy, and it's not a policy that is talked about, but you know that it exists. If you don't know that it exists, you just don't know what to call it. But you know that you're not going to get the good quality treatment. And that's what the public policy is. They're going to talk to each other and around the circle. And even when if you get murdered, you're very lucky if the coroner tells the truth about it. If the cop said that you had drugs in you, well, you haven't done any drugs in your life. If they say you got drugs in you, then people are going to say, oh, he was drugged. And you know what? We believe it. We're the first one to believe it. I don't get why it is that we believe everything that everyone else has to say about us, but we don't trust what we are saying. Trust me when I'm telling you that there's a public policy of police containment. Trust me when I tell you that when it comes to economic development, the only reason that Ann Street is still standing, we said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Talking about revitalization, we're going to revitalize the whole place that the Black Panther Party burned down. And the Black Panther Party burned it down because they were mad and they were doing what they needed to do to get the attention and to get rid of some of that anger and to carry out some things that they were trying to carry out for the betterment of our community. But what we did was said, we are going to